It started the night I caught the faint scent of another woman's perfume on my husband's shirt, not the kind that lingered by accident, the kind that clung with purpose. I stood by the laundry sink, holding his crisp white button-down, my fingers trembling as the sharp floral notes rose from the fabric like a confession. People talk about heartbreak as a loud thing, screaming, breaking plates, slamming doors, but mine came in silence. In that still moment, the truth whispered instead of shouted. If you've ever had your world shatter quietly, stay with me. Like this story, subscribe for more and share it with someone who needs strength disguised as storytelling. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your love turned into betrayal overnight? His name is, and for years, I believed he was my forever. We met in college. I was the girl with paint under her fingernails and dreams bigger than her bank account, and he was the charming finance major who could make a spreadsheet sound romantic. He'd hold my hand during thunderstorms, call me his calm, and promise that no matter how chaotic life got, we'd always find each other again. For a while, we did. We built a life that looked beautiful on paper, the kind people envy without knowing its cracks. A two-story house with blue shutters, a dog named, Sunday brunches where we argued about the best kind of pancakes. I thought we were happy, or maybe I just needed to believe we were. Then little things started changing. Began working late, a that I refused to see for what it was. His laughter stopped sounding like home and started sounding rehearsed. He bought new cologne and said, everyone's updating their look at the office, even though his job didn't require a wardrobe change. And when he looked at me, he didn't see me. He just saw the woman who'd already forgiven him for something he hadn't confessed yet. I remember the first night he came home smelling different. That perfume, floral, expensive, unfamiliar, wrapped around his shirt like a second skin. I tried to ignore it, I really did. But you can't unknow a truth your heart already suspects. The next few weeks passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful lies. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now stayed face down and locked. His voice softened when he said her name, his new, though I didn't know that yet. He started humming in the shower again like a man rediscovering happiness, only it wasn't me he'd found it with. I wish I could say I confronted him right away, demanded the truth like a storm breaking through windows. But betrayal doesn't always ignite fury, sometimes it births paralysis. You freeze, you observe, you collect proof quietly, hoping to be wrong even as the evidence stacks higher than your denial. I began to notice patterns. Late-night meetings that didn't exist on his calendar. Credit card charges from a boutique hotel downtown. And once, a message that popped up on his smartwatch when he thought I wasn't looking. Can't stop thinking about last night. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick. Still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I wanted him to show me the truth. Sometimes, watching the person you love dig their own grave is the only way to stop blaming yourself for the burial. A month later, I found the final piece. He'd left his gym bag on the bed while taking a call. Inside, beneath his towel, was a small bottle of lubricant. Not unusual, except this one wasn't our brand and it wasn't even opened. That's when something in me cracked, but it wasn't rage that filled the space, it was something colder. A quiet, deliberate kind of anger, the kind that doesn't explode, it plans. I remember holding that bottle in my hands, staring at it like it held an answer. And then a thought crossed my mind, dark, ridiculous, but satisfying in a way that made my pulse quicken. You see, I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted revenge that whispered, the kind you'd have to live with, not just feel once. So I waited. He kissed me on the cheek that night, pretending nothing was wrong. He said, "You're quiet lately," and I smiled, just tired. But behind that smile, I was already crafting something that would make him remember what betrayal feels like, not through words, but through consequence. I went to bed beside him, counting his breaths, memorizing his lies, and for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I planned. And planning, I realized, was its own kind of healing. Because when your heart has been used against you, sometimes the only way to reclaim it is to make the liar taste their own truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, slow, even careless, the kind of peace only a man living a double life could enjoy. Each exhale felt like a tiny betrayal, a reminder that he rested easy while I carried the weight of every unanswered question. The next morning, I woke early, earlier than I needed to. I watched him get ready for work, tying his tie with that same practice charm he'd used on me years ago. When he leaned down to kiss my forehead, his cologne, her perfume's rival, filled the air. If you've ever had to smile through betrayal, you know the ache I felt. Stay with me, like this story, subscribe and share, because every lie deserves its reckoning, and sometimes, revenge is just closure spelled differently. Tell me in the comments, would you confront or would you wait? I waited because timing, I realized, was power. I spent the next few days playing the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I pretended not to notice how his eyes drifted toward his phone whenever it buzzed. But behind that performance, I was watching, learning. He'd step out onto the porch after dinner to take calls. He'd smile at the screen like it held something holy. And when I caught glimpses of his reflection in the window, it wasn't guilt I saw in his face. It was thrill. One night, curiosity outweighed restraint. After he went to bed, I took his phone from the charger and pressed my finger to the sensor. It didn't unlock, but his smartwatch, resting on the nightstand, did. One swipe, and there it was. Her name. Their messages read like a slow confession. Can't stop thinking about you. Wish you were here instead of her. That thing you did tonight. My hands shook, my throat went dry. Every word was a dagger dipped in honey. I didn't cry this time either. The pain had passed through me so often, it had nowhere left to go. Instead, something colder settled in, a calm, surgical sort of focus. The next day, I followed him. I told him I had errands to run, kissed him goodbye, and waited 20 minutes before driving into the city. It didn't take long, he wasn't clever, just arrogant. His car sat in front of a small boutique hotel, half hidden behind a row of trees. I parked across the street, heart hammering against my ribs. A few minutes later, I saw them and her. She was younger than me, not prettier, not smarter, just newer. He laughed as he held the door open for her, the same laugh that used to make me believe in forever. I stayed long enough to watch them disappear into the lobby, then I drove home in silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of a storm waiting for the right wind. That night while he showered, I retrieved the bottle from his gym bag again. It sat innocently on the counter, smooth plastic, clear label, stupid promises. And that's when the idea, the wicked, perfect, poetic idea, took form. I didn't want to scream, didn't want to break things or beg for an apology. I wanted a moment that would force him to feel exposed, the same way I had. A moment he would never forget. So I went online, I read, I researched. I made sure what I planned wouldn't hurt anyone permanently, just long enough to teach a lesson. Super glue, it turned out, wasn't just sticky, it was symbolic. Because that's what infidelity really is, a bond that destroys the things it touches. I swapped the bottles the next day. Same shape, same label, same clear liquid. One would have been used for intimacy. The other would become a story whispered through laughter at parties for years to come. As I placed the cap back on, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see a broken woman anymore. I saw someone terrifyingly calm, someone who'd learned how to turn pain into precision. That night he left again. Late meeting, he said, his tie slightly loosened, his smile just crooked enough to seem sincere. I kissed his cheek. Don't work too hard. He winked, you know me. Oh, I did. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. I was painting in the living room, pretending not to wait. The ringtone pierced through the quiet, sharp and urgent. I glanced at the screen, private number. When I answered, all I heard was chaos, shouting, sirens, and then a woman's voice, shrill and panicked. Ma'am, is this Mrs. Carter? Yes, I said, heart thudding. Who is this? This is dispatch from Station 49. Your husband, she paused, clearly trying not to laugh, was involved in a medical situation. He's being treated by paramedics now. My pulse froze. Is he hurt? No, ma'am, she said, failing to hold back a chuckle. He's stuck. Stuck, I repeated. Yes, she said. To a woman, we're trying to separate them now. You may want to meet him at the hospital. I hung up slowly, my mind reeling between disbelief and an emotion I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, something stranger. Justice, maybe. When I arrived, I saw the flashing red lights of the outside the small hotel. Reporters had gathered, cameras rolling. And there, under the dim glow of they wheeled out a stretcher with a blanket covering two heads instead of one. His voice rose above the noise, frantic, furious, humiliated. Don't film this, this is private. But nothing about betrayal is private, not when you've made a fool of the one person who loved you most. I stood behind the crowd, unseen. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him, almost. Then I turned and walked away. The next morning, the world knew. It started as whispers online, then headlines, then laughter that echoed through digital corridors faster than I could breathe. Local businessman rescued after intimate mishap at hotel. No names were printed, but small towns have sharp memories and quick tongues. By noon, everyone knew it was Carter. I didn't post, I didn't speak. I just sat at the kitchen table, the phone buzzing endlessly beside a cold cup of coffee, and listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady, deliberate, disbelieving. If you're still listening, pause here. Like, subscribe, and share this story not for the scandal, but for the truth inside it. Sometimes revenge feels like justice, until you realize justice can still break your heart. And tell me in the comments, have you ever gotten what you wanted, only to find out it didn't make you whole? By evening, the messages began. Some were from a sympathy wrapped in curiosity. Some from old friends, "Are you okay?" followed by a nervous laugh. And one from his mother, trembling between apology and anger. "How could you let something like this happen?" she said through tears. I didn't answer, because what was there to say? He had humiliated himself. I hadn't needed to lift a finger after that phone call. And yet, the silence in our home felt heavier than guilt itself. 3 days later, he came back. Not the confident man who once filled the house with noise. This version of him was smaller, crumpled, and red-eyed from sleepless nights and flashing cameras. He stood at the door like a stranger. "Can I come in?" I let him, but only because I needed to see what remained. His voice shook as he spoke. "I lost my job, you know that. HR said the company can't have me as their face anymore." I nodded slowly. "Maybe that's fair." He blinked. "You think I deserved this?" I tilted my head. "You tell me, did I deserve what you did to me?" He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Shame has a way of stealing language before it can find shape. He sank into a chair, running both hands through his hair. "I know what I did was wrong, but this is cruelty." "Cruelty?" I repeated quietly. "You call it cruelty when the consequences finally look like you." For a moment, the air between us was too still. He didn't know that I knew exactly what had happened, the glue, the paramedics, the story that turned him into a walking punchline. He looked down. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I shook my head. "No, I wanted peace, you gave me chaos, and I thought chaos would feel like power." I sighed, "But it doesn't." He looked up then, eyes hollow. "I made a mistake." "No," I said softly. "You made a series of choices. Mistakes end when you stop making them." He swallowed hard. "Do you still love me?" That question hung in the air like smoke from a match that wouldn't go out. I wanted to say no, to sever the thread cleanly, but love, even wounded, doesn't die gracefully. It lingers. It waits for the echo to fade. "I loved who you were," I said finally, "not who you became." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "Then I'll go." "Where?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Somewhere people don't recognize me." He stood, hesitated, then looked back. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I believed him, but it didn't matter anymore. After he left, the house felt impossibly quiet. I sat on the couch, looking around at the life we'd built, 2 coffee mugs on the shelf, a wedding photo on the mantle, a future that no longer existed. And for the first time since it all began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not regret, just emptiness. The kind that comes when you win a war you never wanted to fight. That night, I looked in the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't broken anymore, but she wasn't whole either. She was learning that revenge doesn't heal, it just carves space where love used to live. And somewhere deep down, I wondered, did I punish him for cheating? Or did I punish myself for still caring? The morning after left, sunlight crept through the curtains like it didn't know what had happened inside these walls. The house looked the same furniture, same framed smiles, same faint smell of his aftershave, but everything felt different. Absence has a sound, and it's louder than any argument. I sat at the table with my coffee growing cold, scrolling past dozens of unread messages. The world was still laughing. The video clips, the memes, the headlines that reduced a decade of love into a single punchline. At first, I thought I'd feel vindicated. I didn't. Because humiliation doesn't cancel pain, it just mirrors it. If you've ever been broken by someone you trusted, then stay with me. Like, subscribe, and share this story, not because it's about revenge, but because it's about what happens after the fire burns out. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive yourself for what you did in anger? By noon, my best friend Maya showed up, unannounced but expected. She had coffee, pastries, and that look on her face that said she'd rehearsed a dozen comforting speeches on the drive over. Are you okay? She asked gently. I laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. That's the thing, I don't know what okay even means anymore. She sat beside me. He destroyed something sacred and you reacted. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that. I stared at the untouched croissant. I didn't just react, Maya, I orchestrated. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I hesitated, then looked her in the eye. I switched the bottle. For a second she didn't breathe, then she covered her mouth, eyes wide. You didn't. I did. And then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. Hard, uncontrolled. The kind of laugh that leaves you clutching your stomach. God, that's insane, genius but insane. I didn't laugh with her, I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew the part of me that planned it wasn't born from strength, it was born from pain. For the next few days, I tried to disappear. I stopped answering calls, I muted every chat group, I let the world move on without me. But the internet doesn't forget. Even as the story began to fade from the headlines, I could still feel it, that invisible whisper that followed me into grocery stores and coffee shops. Strangers looked at me with curiosity, pity, or worse, amusement. It was a strange kind of fame, the kind you earn by losing everything. Then one evening, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Smother stood there, eyes swollen, her hands gripping her purse like it was holding her upright. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She looked around, her gaze lingering on the framed wedding photo. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, she said, voice trembling. And he ruined it, but this, she looked down, struggling for words, this is worse than ruin, this is humiliation. I swallowed hard, he humiliated me first. I know, she said, tears spilling over, but now everyone's laughing at both of you, you don't win in this, you just drown together. Her words cut deeper than she knew, because I had thought that too quietly in the moments when the silence felt heavier than guilt. I'm not proud of what I did, I whispered. She looked up, eyes full of grief. You don't have to be, but don't let it define you either. And with that, she left. That night I stood in front of the mirror again, the house dim and still. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry, not for the marriage, but for the version of myself that had disappeared in the chaos. The woman who loved softly, the woman who believed kindness was strength. She was gone now, replaced by someone who had learned how to weaponize pain. Days turned into weeks. The noise faded, the laughter stopped echoing. But something in me kept replaying the moment I swapped those bottles, not with satisfaction but with shame disguised as memory. Was it justice or just vengeance dressed up as empowerment? I thought I'd ended the story that night. But the truth was, the real ending hadn't even begun. Because karma, as it turns out, doesn't work on a timer. It waits quiet, patient, until you're finally ready to face yourself. And when it came for me, it didn't arrive with flashing lights or public spectacle. It came with a knock on my door and a letter in handwriting. The envelope sat on my doorstep like a ghost that had found its way home. No name, no return address, just my own handwriting staring back at me, the curves familiar and foreign all at once. For a moment I considered throwing it away. Some truths, after all, don't deserve a second life, but curiosity, that cruel human weakness, won. I tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper. His handwriting uneven, rushed, like he'd written it in the middle of the night when guilt finally cornered him. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know the whole story before you decide who the villain really is. I read those words 3 times before I could breathe again. If you're still with me, pause for a second. Stories like this aren't just about betrayal. They're about what comes after when anger fades and the real wound begins to show. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever learned that healing doesn't always start with forgiveness. And tell me in the comments, would you open the letter or would you let the past stay buried? I sat down and kept reading. You were right about everything, I was seeing her, and I hated myself every minute for it, but what you didn't know was why. It wasn't about love or lust or anything noble, it was about feeling seen. After your father passed, you shut down. I tried to reach you, but every time I did, you pushed me away. I wasn't strong enough to stay patient. I should have been, I failed. I never stopped loving you, even when I was doing the things that proved otherwise. And the night it all fell apart, I deserved it. Every bit of it, but I need you to know something. I wasn't the only one who broke us. I stopped reading there. The words blurred as tears hit the paper, spreading the ink like bruises. Because as much as I hated him, some part of me knew he wasn't wrong. When my father died, I'd built walls so high even love couldn't climb them. I'd measured my worth in silence, my comfort in control, my affection in fragments. And maybe, selfish as he was, had only mirrored the cracks I refused to see. That realization hurt worse than the betrayal itself. For days, I couldn't shake the letter from my mind. I'd wanted revenge to make me feel powerful, but it had only made me aware of my own weakness, the way I'd turned pain into performance. People still whispered when I went out. The laughter had shifted from cruel to curious, but it still stung. And I realized something quietly tragic. Even when the world moves on, you're still stuck in the moment your story became a joke. I burned the letter a week later, not out of anger, but because I didn't want it haunting me anymore. The ashes curled in the fireplace, faint smoke rising like a sigh. But as I watched it fade, a thought whispered through the crackling embers. Maybe forgiveness isn't about setting them free. Maybe it's about setting yourself free from the need to replay what broke you. That night, I dreamed of him. He wasn't the man from the news clips or the headlines. He was younger, the man I'd met in college, sitting under a tree with his tie loosened, reading a book he never finished. He smiled at me. "You were my calm," he said. When I woke up, the pillow was damp, but for the first time in months, the ache felt lighter. I started cleaning the house the next morning. Not out of habit, out of renewal. Every drawer I emptied, every box I taped shut, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. In one of those boxes, I found a small silver frame, our wedding photo. My eyes were bright in it, that reckless kind of happiness you only have when you think love is invincible. I traced the glass with my thumb and whispered, "Goodbye," then I placed it in the donation pile. Later that evening, I visited the beach, the one we used to drive to when life felt too heavy. The tide was low, the air cool and gentle. I stood at the edge of the water, toes sinking into wet sand, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close, the fragile first heartbeat of it. The sun began to set, streaking the horizon with fire and gold. And in that quiet, I finally said the words I'd been too afraid to speak aloud. "I forgive you, but I forgive myself first." The waves pulled at the shore, carrying my words away, soft, final, free. Healing doesn't come as a thunderclap. It arrives quietly through the sound of rain against the window, through the first deep breath you take without breaking. In the weeks that followed, my life became smaller but also strangely clearer. I woke up early, watered the plants, walked, and learned how to cook for one without calling it loneliness. The silence that used to suffocate me started to sound like peace. Sometimes I still thought about, not with anger, not even sorrow, just acknowledgement. He had become a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. But endings, no matter how peaceful, leave behind echoes. If you're still here, pause for a moment. Stories like this aren't about revenge or heartbreak, they're about rediscovery. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after losing who you were in someone else. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time you truly felt like you again? One Saturday morning, Maya convinced me to join her for an art therapy workshop downtown. "You used to paint," she reminded me. "You said it made you feel alive." I also said I wasn't any good, I laughed. "That's not the point," she replied. "It's about expression, healing, closure." And somehow, that word, closure, tugged at something inside me I hadn't realized was still open. So I went. The studio was small, filled with light and the smell of turpentine and coffee. People stood quietly before easels, some smiling, some crying. It wasn't about the art, it was about release. That's where I met. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded space. He simply existed beside you, like sunlight through a half-open curtain. He was one of the instructors, tall, soft-spoken, with paint-stained fingers and a voice that carried warmth instead of charm. When he saw me staring at the blank canvas, he said, "Start anywhere. The first line doesn't have to make sense, it just has to exist." I smiled, unsure why those words hit so hard. So I dipped my brush into blue paint, the color of bruises, of oceans, of beginnings, and made my first stroke. Weeks passed, and the class became my refuge. I painted storms that turned into skis, hearts that cracked open and bloomed, would walk by offering quiet advice. "Add light here. Don't be afraid to let the dark show." It wasn't flirtation. It was connection, the kind that grows from shared stillness, not from urgency. He didn't ask about, I never told him. But one evening after class, as we cleaned brushes, he looked at me and said, "You paint like someone who's learning how to forgive." I froze. "You can tell that from colors." He smiled faintly. "Colors never lie." That night I went home with blue-stained fingers and a heart that felt strangely alive. For the first time in months, I dreamed of possibility instead of memory. The next day, I visited my father's grave. I hadn't been there since the funeral. Grief had turned the place into a wound I refused to touch. The cemetery was quiet, the wind gentle. I sat by the headstone and spoke softly. "I'm okay now, Dad, or at least I'm getting there." The words trembled out of me like a confession I'd owed myself. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out one of my small canvases, and placed it beside the flowers, a painting of the ocean at dusk. "New beginnings," I whispered. "You'd probably call it dramatic." I laughed through the tears. That evening, Maya came over with takeout. We sat on the balcony watching the city lights blink awake. "You seem lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I finally stopped waiting for an apology that wasn't coming." She nodded. "That's what growth looks like, choosing peace even when chaos offers more attention." I thought about that long after she left. Because for the first time I understood, closure is when the other person admits their fault. It's when you stop needing them to. One afternoon, as I packed up my things after class, stopped me. "There's a community art show next month," he said. "You should submit something." I laughed. I'm not an artist." He smiled, tilting his head. "Maybe not yet, but you're becoming one." Those words lingered with me all the way home. That night I stood before a blank canvas again, only this time I didn't hesitate. I painted a woman standing in a storm, her hair wild, her dress torn, but her face turned toward the light. When I finished, I titled it The Search. Because that's what this was, not a story about betrayal anymore, but about the long, beautiful, terrifying process of finding myself again. Peace, I learned, is fragile. It doesn't always arrive to stay, sometimes it just visits to see if you're ready. A few weeks after the art show invitation, I woke up to a message I hadn't expected to see again. What? The preview on my phone read, "There's something you should know before I disappear for good." I stared at the screen for a long time, the calm I'd worked so hard to build flickering at the edges. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want him to have that kind of power over me again. But closure, real closure, doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from honesty even when it hurts. So I opened it. Before we go deeper, take a breath. This isn't about reopening wounds, it's about understanding why they existed in the first place. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever faced a truth that made you grow instead of break. And tell me in the comments, would you want to hear the final truth, even if it changed how you remembered everything? The message was short. "I'm moving out of state. New city, new start. I won't contact you again, but I need to tell you something before I go." It wasn't just me, wasn't who she said she was. She wasn't single, and she wasn't even working at my firm. She was hired. She worked for a private firm that investigates infidelity. Apparently someone thought I was cheating before I actually was. They sent her to tempt me to gather evidence. I failed that test. Miserably, I crossed the line. But you deserve to know the affair started because of a lie that was meant to expose one. I don't know who hired her, but I thought you should know before this chapter ends. I read it 3 times before my hands stopped shaking. Someone hired her. The room seemed to tilt. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like I'd been handed a puzzle with a missing piece that suddenly appeared, only to change the entire picture. My first thought was denial. My second was disbelief. My third was something colder, realization. There was only one person who might have the money, motive, and connection to pull that off. It was Mother. That evening I drove to her house. I hadn't seen her since the day she'd shown up crying on my doorstep. The neighborhood felt the same, trimmed hedges, quiet porches, lives pretending to be perfect. She opened the door, her expression softening and tightening at once. "I wasn't expecting you." "Can I come in?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. We sat across from each other at the dining table, a polite distance of heartbreak between us. "Did you hire her?" I asked, no small talk, no preamble. Her eyes darted away. "Why would you think that?" "Because told me, because the timeline fits, and because you've always been better at pretending than at lying." Her lips trembled. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she exhaled, slow and shaky. "Yes," she whispered, "I did." The air left the room. "You did what?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He was pulling away from you, I could see it. I thought if I could prove he was cheating, you'd leave before he destroyed you. I didn't expect it to actually happen." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me," I repeated, disbelief washing over me. "You hired someone to seduce your own son." She covered her face with trembling hands. "I know how it sounds, but I couldn't just watch him ruin your life. I loved you like my own daughter." I stood up, shaking. You didn't protect me. You turned both of us into victims of your manipulation. She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. I never meant for it to go that far. But it did, I said coldly, and now none of us can unwrite what followed. I drove home in silence, the world outside blurred by the tears I refused to let fall. It wasn't just betrayal that broke me this time, it was betrayal disguised as love. Back home, I sat on the floor, surrounded by half-finished canvases. My hands trembled as I reached for a brush and dipped it into red paint, the color of truth, of fury, of bleeding hearts that still dared to beat. I painted until my arms ached, until my tears dried into streaks on my face. When I stepped back, I saw what I'd created, a faceless woman standing between two mirrors, one cracked, one clear. And beneath it, I scrawled a title. The Cost of Control. That night, I didn't dream. I just stared at the ceiling and let the truth sink in. Every person in that story, his mother even, had been trying to control the narrative. And all it ever did was destroy the humanity in it. I whispered into the dark, no more. No more revenge. No more pretending. No more carrying other people's sins in my chest. Tomorrow I would live for me, messy, honest, and unashamed. Morning light spilled through the blinds, warm and unapologetic. For the first time in months, I didn't flinch from it. I sat up in bed and realized something extraordinary. The story no longer owned me. I did. The truth had finally finished unspooling, messy and merciless, but also freeing. Everyone had shown their hand, his mother, even the woman who'd been hired to break us. And while they were all still tangled in their guilt, I was done living inside that web. So I did something simple, something monumental. I decided to begin again. If you've ever stood at the edge of a new chapter, terrified and trembling but still ready to leap, this part is for you. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever realized that peace isn't given to you. It's built brick by shaky brick. And tell me in the comments, what did freedom look like the first time you chose yourself? I started with the walls. I painted every room in the house, not the safe beige loved, but color. Deep blues in the bedroom, soft green in the kitchen, in the hallway. The kind of colors that hummed with life instead of duty. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. When I reached the living room, I paused at the fireplace where I'd burned letter. The ashes had long since been cleaned, but I could still feel their weight in the air. So I hung a painting above it, one of my own, a storm dissolving into sunrise. I titled it after. Then I began sorting through what remained of our shared life. Wedding photos, cards, receipts for trips that meant more to me than to him. One by one, I let them go, not in anger, but in gratitude. They were proof of a woman who had loved fearlessly, even when love turned cruel. Maya helped me move the last of his things into boxes. She watched as I sealed them and said softly, "You're really doing it, huh?" "I am," I replied. "What happens next?" "I don't know," I admitted, smiling faintly. "That's the best part." A week later, the community art show finally arrived. I almost didn't go. I told myself it was just a small event, that it didn't matter, but really I was afraid. Afraid of being seen again, of stepping into a room without the shield of my pain. Found me near the entrance. "You came," he said, smiling that quiet smile that made the world feel slower. "I almost didn't," I confessed. "Then I'm glad almost lost," he said, and led me inside. The gallery was alive with murmurs and music. Canvases lined the walls, each one a heartbeat turned into color. When I spotted mine, The Cost of Control, something inside me shifted. People stood before it, heads tilted, whispering. One woman touched her chest and said softly, "It feels like freedom and regret at the same time." I didn't say anything, but tears burned behind my eyes. She understood. After the show, and I walked outside. The night was cool, the streetlights gold against the pavement. "You're not the same woman who came to class months ago," he said. "I know," I replied. "That version of me was surviving, this one's living." He looked at me for a long moment. "You should be proud." "I am," I said simply, "not for what I did, but for what I learned after." The days that followed felt lighter. I didn't rush to fill the silence or chase new beginnings. I let life move at its own rhythm. I painted, I taught a few workshops. I started volunteering at the community center. I even adopted a second dog, a clumsy, tail-wagging rescue named Sunny who followed me everywhere. And somewhere between feeding him treats and cleaning up paint spills, I realized that joy doesn't always come as grand gestures. Sometimes it's just waking up and not missing who you used to be. A month later, I got a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a check. "The sale proceeds from the cost of control." There was no note, just a handwritten line from the buyer. "Your pain turned into beauty. Thank you for sharing it." I sat with that message for a long time. Because for the first time, the story wasn't about betrayal or revenge or loss. It was about transformation. I hadn't just survived my heartbreak, I had turned it into art. That night, I opened my journal and wrote a single line across the page. I forgive everyone not because they deserve peace, but because I finally do. And in that moment, I meant it. Because the turning point in every story isn't the twist or the ending. It's the quiet, trembling decision to start again, knowing you'll never be the same. And loving that truth anyway. It's strange how healing sneaks up on you. You spend months clawing through the rubble of what was, replaying words, moments, regrets, until one day you wake up and realize you haven't thought about them in weeks. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes your favorite sound. That morning I opened the windows wide. The breeze carried the scent of rain and jasmine through the room. The curtains swayed, sunlight spilling across the floor like an invitation. For the first time, I felt like my home wasn't haunted anymore. His ghost had finally left. Not because he wanted to, but because I stopped keeping the door open for him. If you're still with me, take a moment. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever learned that letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom in disguise. And tell me in the comments, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to release? I began living with intention. No more autopilot mornings, no more surviving out of habit. I painted every day not to prove anything, but because creation itself had become my therapy. I'd lost count of how many canvases filled the studio, but each one carried a piece of the story I no longer needed to tell aloud. Sometimes would stop by. He never tried to fix me or fill the silence, he just existed beside it. He'd bring coffee, help me hang paintings, and tell me about his latest projects with the art students. We never labeled what was growing between us. It wasn't love, not yet. It was understanding, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't rush. One afternoon, as we packed up supplies, he said something that stayed with me. You know, forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook, he said. It's realizing the hook was in you the whole time. That line settled deep in my bones. That evening, I visited the beach again, the same one where I'd said my first goodbye months ago. The tide was low, the sky painted in soft pink and gold. I walked barefoot along the sand, letting the water kiss my ankles, feeling the pull and release of every wave. With every step, I thought about the things I'd finally released. The anger, the blame, the need to rewrite the past into something gentler than it was. I whispered their names to the wind, not as curses, but as farewells. Then I smiled, a small, private smile, because I knew that every version of me, the one who loved, the one who broke, the one who planned revenge, had led me here. To peace, to freedom, to me. When I got home, I found a message waiting. It was from his mother. No preamble this time, no excuses, just a few quiet lines. I'm sorry, I thought I was saving you. I was only saving my pride. You were the best part of him and I ruined that. I hope one day you find someone who deserves the version of you I never did. I read it twice, then deleted it, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need her apology to mean anything anymore. I'd already made peace without permission. Weeks later, the art gallery contacted me again. They wanted to feature the cost of control in a permanent exhibit about emotional resilience. I laughed when I read the email. Who would thought that my pain would one day hang on a wall, not as tragedy, but as testament? I agreed, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted the story to end somewhere it could help someone else. On opening night, the gallery was warm with soft lights and murmurs. People moved slowly between the paintings, whispering words like hope and courage. Stood beside me, hands in his pockets, smiling quietly. How does it feel? He asked. Strange, I admitted, like I'm watching a version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. He nodded. Maybe that's what healing really is, learning to love the versions of you that didn't know how to. I looked up at my painting, the faceless woman between two mirrors, and for the first time I realized that she wasn't trapped between reflection and reality. She was walking out of both. That night after the event, I came home, made tea, and stood by the window watching the rain begin again. The city lights shimmered in the puddles below, like the world itself was learning how to shine through its scars. I thought about everything that had happened, the love, the lies, the lesson, and whispered softly, thank you for the breaking, for the rebuilding, for the becoming. And as I said it, I realized I wasn't talking to anymore. I was talking to life itself. A full year passed. 1 year since the night everything shattered, since lies turned into lessons and pain became the strange, silent teacher I never asked for but desperately needed. When I look back now, it feels like watching a movie I've already forgiven. The scenes are the same, the heartbreak, the humiliation, the noise, but I'm no longer inside them. I'm in the audience, calm, older, wiser, and softer. That's the strange beauty of survival. One day, you realize the story didn't end when you thought it did. It just changed hands. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you've ever learned that peace isn't something you find, it's something you build. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did your hardest heartbreak leave behind? I still paint. Every morning I light a candle, make tea, and let color speak the words I can't. My art no longer comes from pain, it comes from gratitude. I've stopped asking why it happened and started asking what it taught me. It taught me that love isn't a guarantee, it's a gift. And sometimes the person who teaches you that lesson isn't the one you stay with, it's the one who breaks you open enough to understand it. It taught me that revenge is a distraction, not closure. Hurting someone else doesn't make your wounds smaller, it just gives them more places to live. It taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer needing the past to hurt in order to prove it mattered. And it taught me, above all, that healing doesn't make you who you were before. It makes you someone new, someone deeper, someone braver. Last week, I stood at the gallery again, this time as a mentor. I watched a younger artist stare nervously at her blank canvas and say, "What if I mess it up?" I smiled. "Then you start again, that's the whole point, to keep painting until it becomes something beautiful." She looked relieved, and I realized I wasn't just talking about art anymore. I was talking about life. Later that evening, met me by the pier. The sunset stretched across the horizon like a watercolor, soft pinks fading into blue. We didn't need words. Some stories don't end with grand declarations, they end with peace. He reached for my hand, not to claim it, but to hold it. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to protect my heart. I'd already done the hardest thing. I'd learned how to live without fear of breaking again. Before leaving, I took one last look at the ocean. The waves rolled in, endless and patient, like time itself forgiving the shore over and over again. And I whispered the truth I'd spent a year learning, the truth I wanted everyone listening to remember. Life will break you, yes, but it will also build you again, softer, stronger, and far more honest than before. The people who hurt you were just the chisels, you are the sculpture. I smiled, let the wind catch my hair, and finally felt free.